Hi there. Thanks so much for coming to Product Drive. For this session, we're going to be covering how to leverage switching costs to grow your own product. I'm Clement. I'm the founder of Product Teacher, and I'm so excited to be leading this session today. So first, I'm going to give a quick introduction about myself. Then let's take a step back and discuss how do users and organizations think about selecting products. From there, we can then talk about what are switching costs and how do they play into products. Then from there, we can talk about how to strategically decrease the cost to switch to your product, as well as increase the cost to switch to a competitor's product. And with that, we'll dive right in. So again, I'm Clement. I am the founder of Product Teacher, and my goal is to help make other people's lives happier, easier, and better. In the last 5 years, I've shipped 10 multi-million-dollar products, and I was promoted from associate product manager to group product manager within just 1.5 years. Since then, I've written 4 books, more than 100 articles, etc., on product management. And in case you're ever looking, you can see the link over there. Speaking of books, you can always find them on Amazon. Again, my goal is to share my knowledge with others so that they can benefit and grow their careers. To find more of my work or to schedule one-on-one coaching, go to productteacher.com to find more information. So now let's talk about how organizations and users select products. So when someone's trying to select a product, they're really looking for something that's going to solve their pain. And when they're making that decision, they're ordering it by return on investment, ROI. In other words, what people are looking for is not just, hey, does this product do what I want it to do? They also need to worry about its costs, right? When you're trying to identify a product for your organization, not only do you have to think about, well, is it going to solve my pain, but you also have to worry about how much it's going to cost the organization in terms of time, money, adoption. And so from that perspective, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is when organizations and users are selecting products, they're always looking for what gives them the most return on investment. In other words, there's no minimum bar on how much benefits you have to have, what kind of features you have to have, and there's no maximum threshold for how much a product should cost. Rather, it's all about the ratio of benefits to costs. In other words, what you want is you want there to be a lot of benefits and very few costs, so that way you beat out the competition. That's why you see that there are a lot of expensive products out there that still win, that organizations still select because their return on investment is superior. And on the flip side, many times you might have a cheap product, even a free product, but no one wants to use it because it doesn't provide them enough benefit. And so that means that as product managers, product marketers, we always need to be thinking about both how to highlight the benefits of our products, as well as demonstrating how it reduces costs for that organization. So again, to win, what we need to do is we need to make our product's return on investment higher than everyone else's. An organization is going to always pick the highest ROI product, and that makes sense. They're beholden to their shareholders to create the highest possible returns. And that means that the products that they pick also need to give them the highest returns, right? That investment has to be worth it. So we need to find ways to make our ROI better than the next possible competitor. Okay, well, how might we do that? I think most of us are pretty familiar with creating new features to create more benefits, but what about the cost side of that equation? How can we use that to drive more product growth, to drive more adoption? Well, one of the most impactful costs of products is its switching cost, also known as its adoption cost. These are the hurdles that people face when they're trying to pick a product, then adopt it, and then actually stick with it in the long term. And the kinds of things that might come up as switching costs for an organization are the time cost, right? How long does it take to learn how to use that new product? How long does it take to evaluate that product versus all of the other competitors? There's the monetary cost, right? So does it cost us more than it used to? There's the mental effort of having to spend all of that time and that energy to think about, well, do we need to switch to another product? And if we do need to switch to another product, right, how do we pick the one that works the best? There's organizational effort, right? So our entire organization, our company, if we do decide to use this product, now I have to retrain everyone on how to use it instead of what we were using before. Now I have to come up with new processes, we have to come up with new procedures, and that's not trivial. And of course, there's the emotional cost. You might be really attached to the product that you're currently using. You might find that it's something that gives you a lot of delight, as you might not want to switch away from it. Conversely, there are some products that are incredibly delightful. Think of Superhuman, the email product, or Notion, the organizational product, right? These two are so delightful to use that people flock to them even if it means that they have to rework their entire organization's processes so that they can adopt these products. So all of these kinds of costs we call switching costs. The thing is, few product managers realize that switching costs are an incredibly powerful lever in terms of product strategy. We can actually use switching costs to make our product more viable, to make it stand out in a competitive field. And we can also increase the cost it takes to switch to a competitor so that way people stay with us for the long run. So what we can do is we can classify these switching costs into 3 different categories for the purposes of our discussion today. There are financial costs, so that monetary cost of adoption. There are procedural costs, which is the amount of time that you need to use to go ahead and rework your existing procedures, to rework your processes so that you can actually go use that product. And then there are relational costs, that emotional identity cost that you have when you're using this product versus when you switch to another one. So now that we know about the 3 kinds of switching costs, now we can dive deep into how we can strategically use switching costs to grow our product and to unlock more value. So first, let's talk about how we can decrease the cost it takes to switch to my product. So the key thing to keep in mind is that when you're trying to get people to switch to your product, you're necessarily talking about prospects, people who aren't using your product yet. And so it's incredibly important to help them make that decision in your favor. Even if your product might be the most amazing thing in the world, if prospects feel that the costs are too high to even consider switching, they're not going to consider you at all. So we need to help make it easier for prospects by removing as much of those barriers as we can upfront. So let's first talk about financial costs. How might we make it easier for prospects to consider us in terms of switching over? Well, one of the things that we can do is we can actually create a freemium model. So as an example, think about Trello. Trello has a freemium model where users can start using it for free. And then if you want to upgrade to use more powerful features, you can always pay more there. And so that's a freemium model. The free part means that the vast majority of users are using a free version of the product. And the mium part refers to premium product. And so those are paid users who are accessing much more powerful functionality. Another way that you can lessen the risk, reduce the cost of a prospect switching over to you, is to offer a free trial period. So this is a little bit different from the freemium model because what you're doing is you're giving people access to a paid version, but without them having to pay upfront. And so as an example, there's Teachable. What Teachable is that it's an online platform that lets creators make courses. And the first 2 weeks on Teachable are free, even though after that you do have to pay. And the really great thing about making those first 2 weeks free is that way, creators can easily see, oh, this is how Teachable works. This is how I'm going to get a lot of value out of Teachable, rather than trying to come up with things myself where I'm trying to record these video courses. And so trial periods can be an incredibly effective way to decrease the cost of switching over to your product. And of course, whenever we talk about financial costs, we can always talk about how to discount in a really thoughtful way. So you can always provide discounts when someone's trying to sign up for an annual version rather than trying to pay month by month. And so then that way, it makes your product stand out. It makes it more palatable for them to want to purchase your product for that longer period of time. And you can also bundle things together, right? You can give tiered pricing. And so as an example, right, let's say that the first 10 users cost you however much, but then the next 20 users after that cost you less per user. The more that you get through your company, the less the prospect has to pay. And so the more that they commit to you, the more that you can commit to them and reduce those costs. There are lots of ways that we can do this, right? We can do it by user count. We can do it by volume over a period of time. We can also bundle different products together, right? So, well, you've purchased product A with us. If you purchase product B with us, we'll go ahead and offer you a discount. And again, these are really great ways to decrease the cost it takes to switch over to your product. As a reminder, the reason why this is important is as we reduce the cost to switch to our product, it increases the return on investment that the prospect sees from us. And if the return on investment on our product is better than whatever it is that they're using right now, they're going to switch, right? And so that's really the key. We want to increase the return on investment for our product offering to be so high that the company who is assessing you has no choice but to select your product because they are obligated to select the products that create the highest return on investment for them. So now we talked about how we can use financial costs to decrease the cost to switch to your product. But what about procedural costs? How can we make it easier for people to jump onto your product when they were already using some other product before? Well, there are a couple of tried and true methods for doing so. The first one is using in-product onboarding, teaching people how to use your product. So you can set up different guides, you can set up tutorials, so that way, as people use your product, they can start to master it, right? That decreases the amount of time that they need to take to actually start using your product and to start deriving value for their company. And so in-product onboarding, for example, User Pilot, is a really great way to increase your product's return on investment by decreasing the cost to switch to your product. The thing is, just because you implement User Pilot or any other onboarding tool doesn't mean that it makes your product any cheaper from a monetary perspective, from a financial cost perspective, but it definitely reduces the amount of time it takes for someone to use the product, to derive value from it. And so that's why in-product onboarding is such a critical component to use as you're trying to look for ways to make your product stand out and to reduce its cost to prospects. Another thing that you can do is you can offer out-of-product help. And so as an example, Zendesk is a really great way for you to publish help articles, right? You can use videos, you can set up guides, you can use chat bots, or you can use chat features within your website. You can offer a phone line so that way people can call in if they have any questions. And all of these ways are really great for reducing the amount of concern or friction that users have before they decide to switch over to your product. Because again, you're making it super easy for them to adopt your product. They know that you've got their back. In case they run into any questions, any concerns, any frustrations, you've got them, right? And so out-of-product help is also a really fantastic way to decrease the cost of switching over to your product when they're already using something else. And finally, we want to make sure that we use standardized user experiences. What do I mean by that? Well, there are some design patterns that people are already really used to using. Search bars are typically at the top of the screen. Hamburger menus are typically where you go to try to find your settings. And so if you try to mess with these kinds of designed experiences, it can be really hard for people to figure out how to use your product, right? If you put the search bar at the bottom of the product, if you put the search bar on the right-hand side, people might not know that they can search, whereas they're so used to seeing the search bar at the top of the page. Similarly, if you're trying to do user accounts, right, you probably want that to be on the upper right-hand corner of the screen, because typically the upper left-hand corner is where you put your logo. So again, keep in mind that standardized user experiences, these design best practices, are a really great way to reduce the amount of mental overhead people have when they're trying to orient onto your product, because they're already used to using something else. And so you want to make it really easy for them to make that jump. So now I've got some really fantastic ideas for making it easy for prospects to switch over to us. And as you can imagine, it's a really great way to increase your conversion rate and to decrease your cost of acquisition. So now let's talk about the reverse. What about our existing customers? How do we make sure that they don't leave to a competitor? Well, that's a fantastic question. One of the ways that we can do that is we can make it incredibly difficult for them to want to switch over to a competitor. We can increase the cost that it takes for them to switch over to someone else. Because what we have to do is you have to remember, people aren't being selfish or disloyal when they're thinking about other competitors to use. Their company needs them to select the highest return on investment product that they can. And so they're always assessing the market. They're always looking at your competition. So you need to make sure that your return on investment is higher than everyone else's. And of course, while you can always build more and more features, more and more benefits within your product, you can also make it less palatable to switch to a competitor, right? You can make it more difficult because now they're locked in with you over time. You're providing them so much benefit that it's too costly for them to even consider someone else. So how might we increase the cost to switch? Well, there are a couple of really compelling ways to do so. First, when it comes to the financial cost to switch over to a competing product, the one that we can use within the product itself is we can go ahead and build out a reward system. And so, as you can imagine, when people are using Starbucks rewards, they're incentivized to continue to transact with Starbucks, right? They don't want to switch over to Pete's or Blue Bottle, because if they do, they can't use the reward points. And so now they think, oh, well, I should continue using Starbucks because I'm getting rewarded for using Starbucks. Similarly, within your product, you can create a reward system so that way, as people continue to use your product over time, they're being rewarded for it more and more and more. And that makes it so much less likely for them to even want to consider a competitor in the first place. An out-of-product way to increase the cost to switch to a competitor is to work alongside your legal team so that we have really clear contract clauses. That way, if any of your customers wind up breaking their contract with you when they do switch over to a competitor, they are still on the hook to pay you because they did get value out of your product. You should be fairly paid for that. And so you can always work alongside your legal team. Of course, definitely reach out to those stakeholders and subject matter experts within your own company. But that is something that you can do to make sure that it's harder to switch over to a competitor, right? And so a couple of other things that you can do, right? You can make a contract take a longer period of time, right? You can set up a contract to be 3 years, 5 years, even 10 years sometimes. And that makes it really difficult for people to want to switch over to a competitor because they know that they're getting the best rates in the industry by sticking alongside you. And that if they switch away, they're still on the hook to pay you over that period of time. So now I've talked about financial costs. Well, what about procedural costs, right? How might we make it so that users love using your product and switching over to a competitor means that they have to spend a lot more time trying to set up their processes? Well, one of the ways that we can do this is we can create an integrations ecosystem. What do I mean by that? Well, when our product is wired up to all of these other products, we can create all of this value add that then they can't get anywhere else. So as an example, Salesforce is best in class for its integrations ecosystem, right? Once you use Salesforce, you're not just using Salesforce, you're using all of the other things that are integrated to Salesforce when it comes to your CRM. And so that means that if you ever try to switch away from Salesforce, well, you're kind of out of luck because now you don't have any of those other integrations that you were using when you were on Salesforce. And so as you can imagine, this integrations ecosystem can be a really powerful way to keep users with you over the long run because they're getting value not just out of your own product, but also out of all of the different partners that you work with. Another way to increase the procedural cost is to create shortcuts and macros within your own product, because that means that as users get more and more comfortable in using your product, they're not going to be able to take these shortcuts away with them somewhere else. And so as an example, Superhuman is a really amazing email application that people can use to keep track of all of their emails. And what people really love about it is all of the different shortcuts that it has, to the point where if anyone tries to switch back over to Gmail or Yahoo Mail or Microsoft Outlook, they feel really frustrated because they don't have all these productivity shortcuts anymore. Only Superhuman has these shortcuts. Similarly, Notion beats out Confluence a lot of the time because Notion just has better shortcuts. And so people really love shortcuts if they can master them. And so one of the things that you can do is come up with really thoughtful shortcuts or automate away a lot of the tedious or manual processes that come along with products within your category. So that way you stand out. So that way you are more efficient than everyone else. Yet another great way to increase the procedural cost is to implement dashboards and analytics within your product. Because by doing so, people get to have all of this insight into how to use your product, into how their business is performing. And if they switch away from your product and that competitor doesn't have a dashboard, doesn't have analytics, well, they no longer have as much clarity into how their business is doing. And so then that means that they have to take a lot of additional time trying to manually extract this information, put it into dashboards or analytics of their own, right? And so by building out dashboards and analytics, you can increase the cost of switching over to a competitor and keep your current customers sticking with you for a long period of time. Another way that you can make it harder to switch over to a competitor is to implement team management tools within your software. Because by doing so, as more and more people join onto your product, right, it makes it harder and harder for people to switch away. Now you have something called a network effect, where the more people within that company on your product, the more valuable your product is to everyone. And so that's why sometimes you can have a really amazing payoff by implementing team functionality, ensuring that managers have insight into what their direct reports are doing, making it easy for teammates to collaborate with one another. All of these kinds of team functionalities can make you stand out in a place where everyone else is just using individual accounts. And so that's also another really great way to increase the cost it takes to switch over to a competitor. And finally, let's talk a little bit about relational cost, right? That emotional self-investment that comes with using a product. Something to keep in mind is that all users of products are human beings, and human beings navigate their world through emotion. And so it's important for us to keep their emotions in mind. It's important for us to make them feel valued, treasured, respected. And so one thing that we can do is we can create a sense of belonging by establishing user communities. Forums or conferences like this one is a really great way to connect all of your users together and to make them feel like they're a part of something bigger. By doing so, when people feel that they belong alongside your community, it makes them a lot less likely to want to switch over to a competitor. Because if they switch to a competitor, they're not just losing access to your product, they're losing access to their friends, their colleagues, all of these people that they know from all around the world. And so that's why they'll want to stick with you over the long run. Another way to make it harder to switch to a competitor is to implement social sharing functionality. Now, of course, it depends on the product. Some products shouldn't have social sharing. So if we're talking about, let's say, Stripe for payments, there's nothing to socially share there. But if your product happens to be a fit for social sharing, it can be a really great way to knock out the competition, because that way it's much easier for people to want to share about your product to others, right? To really increase your brand name, your brand image, and to decrease the likelihood that a competitor is going to be top of mind for someone else. And so social sharing, when used appropriately, can be a really great way to increase the cost to switch to a competitor. Along the same veins, we can also use points, rankings, and awards to keep people using our product over the long run. This is kind of like the reward system, but not exactly, because a reward system typically pays out in terms of financial benefits, whereas points, rankings, and awards are all about social benefit. And so when you think about, let's say, Reddit or Stack Overflow, people really love seeing their points go up to the point where they're going to want to stick on that platform and not switch somewhere else, because if they went somewhere else, they'd lose all of their points, they lose all of their awards. And so when people feel like they belong, when people feel like, oh, my identity is part of me using this product, they're not going to want to consider any other competitors, because now they have to rebuild their identity from scratch. And so this is also a really great way to solve for people's emotional needs while also making your product much stronger versus the competition. So now I've talked about how to decrease the cost to switch over to your product for prospects, and for current customers, we've also talked about how to increase the cost to switch over to a competitor. Let's now take a look at a real world example of switching costs in practice. So back when I was group product manager at Movoto, a real estate company, I was in charge of a real estate agent mobile CRM app. And one of the things that was really challenging is that I regularly saw our users churn to use other products instead. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to make it easier for users to be able to manage their entire teams on our agent app. What I did was I built out this team management functionality where users can transfer records between each other if they're on the same team. That includes notes, history, details, all that good stuff. And the really powerful thing here is that now you have real estate agents who are working together. They're collaborating, right? They have insight into each other's work. And that's really powerful when you have multiple real estate agents all reporting to the same team leader, right? Now they can bounce leads across one another, right? Say that one real estate agent knows how to speak Spanish, the other one knows how to speak Chinese, and they wind up getting the wrong kind of user assigned to them. Well, that's okay. They can always reassign to each other, right? And they can see the entire history of notes. They can see all of the details, what that user's preferences are, so that way they can best help that home buyer or that home seller and make that transaction happen. And so this was a really incredibly powerful set of functionality. And on top of that, a team leader could actually see each of their individual agents' performance. They could see who was doing well, who was doing poorly, and where they had to intervene. And that was functionality that didn't exist in other kinds of mobile CRM apps for real estate agents. So when we implemented these things, one of the things that we saw very quickly was that team members stopped churning off of our app. They really started staying on. They really started to standardize because their team leaders started baking these into day-to-day operations and procedures, right? I think one of the things that I thought was really insightful was that for a particular agent team, their leaders started running these weekly check-ins where everyone would pull out their mobile app and they'd all check in on each other of, hey, who's doing well? Hey, who's struggling? How do we reassign these leads and make sure that everyone's doing well? And when everyone was on that same app, right, it made it easier for all of them to make a lot of progress together. Whereas if there was someone who wasn't on the app, it made it really hard for them to make forward progress. And so what we had done is we made it very difficult for anyone to want to switch off of the app and use something else, because now it would break their team's procedures. So once we had implemented this set of team management functionality, we saw that for a lot of our real estate agent teams, churn dropped by more than 50%. And that was really incredible, right? We were bleeding users before, and now we saw a lot of retention over time. And so that was a really powerful way for us to increase the procedural costs to switch to a competitor and also provide a lot of benefit for our current users. And so again, increasing procedural costs and generally speaking, thinking about how to leverage switching costs is a really powerful way for you to position your product so that way you beat out competitors and your customers stay with you for the long run. So to summarize, we don't always want to just think about, hey, what are the newest features that we can sell, right? What new benefits can we ship? Let's really think about how can we use switching costs to better set up our product for success. If we want to obtain new users, what we'll want to do is we want to decrease the switching costs to jump onto our product. And if we want to increase adoption and decrease churn, what we want to do is we want to increase the switching costs for people to select a competing product. And again, keep in mind that switching costs aren't always just financial, right? You don't have to be the lowest priced product on the market. You can actually occupy a really premium position in the market, because what you're doing is you are tackling procedural costs. What you're doing is you're tackling relational costs. And that means that people will see your product as the highest return on investment and therefore select you versus the competition. And with that, that wraps up my presentation. Thanks so much. To access even more product management education resources, check out our website at www.productteacher.com or check out our classes at courses.productteacher.com. And you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Thanks so much.